Josef Sudek, the Czech photographer, is referred to as the poet of Prague. Even though he was not technically a street photographer, but what can we street photographers learn from him? Hi, it's Peter here, and let's get right into the business. Master of light. We can learn so much about light when we look at his photographs because he really mastered that, as we will see later also in this video when I talk about one of his famous or most famous set of images. He photographed a lot of Prague, photographing low light and nighttime, and with the equipment in the 40s and 50s and even earlier weren't that good in low light. So he had to master the exposure, he had to master the balance between light and shadow and all that. It might be something that we take it for granted now with all the automatic systems and P modes and all that. It's really a lot easier. But at that time, to see the light in the way that Josef Sudek did is really something remarkable. And as we will talk later about the mystery in his images, which is a really big part, you really get to understand what the light meant for him in his photographs, because I think the light is the thing, of course, with other things, is a crucial part of making the mood and adding the mystery, as we will learn later in this video. And the second one is attention to detail. Usually when we photograph on the streets, we take the scene and there are a lot of things, and the image is a bigger piece of the whatever happened there, and it shows a lot more. But what we can learn from Sudek is that concentrating on the details, architectural details, some small things in the street, maybe adding some odd elements in the background, or maybe a small detail in the person you photograph. Even though the details that Sudek was photographing, he did not photograph that many people in his street photography style photographs of Prague. It was more about small things and bigger things in the scene. So it was a non-human approach to street photography, which is also something that we can learn. It doesn't have to include a human being. It can be a park bench in a park, or a bench in a city, or a flower, or some scenes on a window, or whatever you see in the streets. And that's also something that we need to learn to see. As in my latest video, The Art of Observation, is something that we miss 90% of what we see in front of us. So we need to learn that. So I'll put a link into that video over there, and it will be in the description too. So because that is a little bit linked to this, what I'm doing now. And that's why I'm actually making this video right now, even though I visited Sudek's studio in last year, November, and made some footage from there. But we'll talk about the studio a bit later. So pay attention to textures, patterns, little details in the city. Play around with the depth of field, and that's also something that I don't do that much. I usually stop down quite a bit and want everything to be sharp, like the little bit the classical way of making street photographs. But adding some mystery and mood to the images, maybe using a wide open lens and have some blurry backgrounds, and that could add a little mystery to the image and emphasize the details that I'm photographing. So that is something that I might try later this year to make a little bit mystery and empty streets and stuff like that. But that'll be interesting. That's one style that I've sometimes done in the past, but haven't done that lately because I've been drawn more towards busy reflections and stuff like that. I don't know. It's just a phase that I'm having probably right now. I already mentioned Josef Sudek's studio. It's a small building, between in a courtyard, or it's not a courtyard, but inside in the back of a apartment building inside, and there's a little park and a little studio space with the famous window where he made probably his most important and most known work, called Window of My Studio, and that is a good example of mundane things and photographing through the glass to his garden. And that was because he was kind of exiled in his home during the war, because he lost all his commercial work. So he had to, figure out something else. And that set of images came through that. And that is a really remarkable show of creativity, just to make the best out of the situation and photographing out of the window. And what's great about this set of images is that it kind of shows the whole philosophy of Sudek. They say that it comes from Spinoza, his thinking of photography. Spinoza is a philosopher, not a photographer. And the mystery, the emotion, and also someone would call that this is the romantic style that he had on this because of the tones of the black and white images and the mystery and the moody feeling of everything. And I think it's one of my favorite set of images from any photographer because of the creativity and the idea that you just, from your own window, what you see out, and you can make a whole body of work. I think it's remarkable. The third one is persistence and patience. This is a quote from Josef Sudek. I believe a lot in instinct. One should never dull it by wanting to know everything. One shouldn't ask too many questions, but do what one does properly. Never rush and never torment oneself. And his approach was really being patient and waiting for the perfect moment. And that time they used big cameras, so you had to be patient and persistence because you couldn't rush into the moment. Setting up the camera before you can see the light, so pre-visualizing. Let's say that you go to a park and you know when the light is perfect. You set up your equipment and wait for the perfect moment. And this is also something that we can learn from landscape photographers. That's their way to approach the scene. And we could do that in a street photography too. In a city where you cannot control everything. Of course, in the nature and the landscape, you cannot control the light or how it ends up, if there are clouds or not, or what you want and what type of color is the sunset or stuff like that. But the nature itself usually is, quite stationary, like is the city. But the city is not about the stationary buildings. It's about what happens around the buildings and the movements and everything. And that cannot be controlled. So it's a little different. But with the Sudek's approach, where you set up your camera and just wait for something to happen, or in his case, when the light is perfect and the mood looks like the way he wants. That's something that we all can learn. But then, of course, when that thing happens, we need to be fast. I really enjoy Sudek's mystery and emotion and kind of like tranquility. I think that's what it's called. Really calm images. And of course, the perfect composition usually. And that comes from the slow approach and being patient. Beyond the first glance. And that is something interesting because what Josef Sudek says, that if there is no mystery, it's not it. It just doesn't feel right. When something mysterious, then it's the real thing, I think so. What is a photograph? It's something back there even further behind that question. What does this mean is that photographs have layers. If photography doesn't have a mystery or layer, it doesn't raise any questions, and it's just you see everything and everything is obvious. It's not a good photograph, according to Josef Sudek. And this is something that we also need to learn, that things are symbols that we see in a photograph, or when we're photographing, we want to see some symbols and some things that are referencing to something, and they might be the questions and the answers, and the mystery might be something different for each one of us, because we've lived a different life. We have different experiences, we're different age, we're different culture, different countries. We all have different stories to the image. But if the image doesn't evoke those emotions and stories in the viewer's mind, then I don't think it's a very good photograph. And that is something that we can all learn, and that is probably the hardest part in photography, in my opinion, to get that. Just don't photograph the obvious. That is too easy. Try to go beyond that and go deeper. And there is a video about when I was talking about David Lynch's metaphor about how to go deep. So you need to really, get your mind concentrated on what you're seeing and seeing the convention, seeing the relationships and trying to catch that emotion that you feel, and it's more about what you feel. Try to photograph what you feel instead of what you see. And that's probably the thing that I interpret what Josef Sudek meant here. I could be totally off with this, but that's how I interpret that. What Sudek says, that photography that lacks mystery loses its artistic and emotional power. The best photographs in his eyes are those that offer layers of meaning, promoting reflection and imagination. I think that's probably the biggest take that we can take from this. And before we get into the fifth one, I do have an extra tip after that. It's an interesting one, an interesting fact about Josef Sudek. And the fifth one is emotional connection to a place. And this quote is not from Josef Sudek, but it's from Marketa Lushkakova that talks about Sudek. I often stay in one place for a long time, or I walk for hours on end, hours, days, even years. You cannot take a picture unless you are there with the camera. It is very lovely to find myself in a particular exalted mood when pressing the shutter, but this is the reward, not a vantage point. From Josef Sudek and Josef Kudelka, another Czech photographer, I learned how long it takes to get a good photograph. And this one was Marketa Lushkakova, and she's a Czech photographer also. And yeah, this is very close to what we were talking earlier, patient. Getting a good photograph of a place is, you can go out and take a good photograph, but that's by accident. But if you go and repeatedly go to the same place or same area and photograph for hours, days, even years, you're starting to get some images, because I don't think there is a quick reward in photography, except small ones when you actually get the photograph, the moment you get the photograph that you have been, wanting or pre-visualizing for maybe even years. Of course, there is that gratification right away there. But to really master the craft, which I think is impossible to master 100%, is constant learning and being patient and repeatedly going back and forth with different places and know the place and see how the light is and see what happens and what time of day is the best time to photograph in a certain place and all that. I think that's the most important tip from this, and it just doesn't come like that. You just have to, learn the place and know the place and get to know it. Sometimes you just walk around and take no photographs, just observe what's going on, and then next time you go with the photograph in your mind. And it's not easy to explain, but the problem with contemporary photography and contemporary people that are too short-minded, is that the right word? I hope, because I don't want to insult anyone, but the concentration span has been less and less because of the mobile phones. We need to check it like every 5 minutes what's going on in the social media. I've kind of done less that lately. I try, but of course I want to go to see if someone has liked my photographs in Instagram and photo app or something like that. But it's human. But I try not to do that, and that will make me more concentrated on the stuff that I'm actually doing. And that also applies to photography. When you're out there, don't use your phone. Don't take a look at your phone. Just photograph, and that's it. Because if you're constantly looking at your phone, you'll lose your mojo. And I think that's something. Try to emotionally connect with the place where you're photographing. And then the extra tip: embrace the limitations. Josef Sudek, back in the day, he had a huge, big camera. But what made it even harder for him? He lost his arm in World War I. So he had to carry all the stuff, big cameras, big tripods, with one hand. What is our excuse not to go out and photograph? This is just whatever camera you have, you don't have an excuse. The only excuse is that you make up. So just go out and photograph and embrace the limitations. And that's also the limitation of the equipment you have. You might not necessarily need the newest camera. You just start with the cameras you have. If you want to start to do street photography, just use the camera that you have and embrace the limitations and try to overcome them. That's creativity. And photograph things that you are able to photograph. Concentrate on the things that you can photograph and not wanting that I would have, could have, should have if I only had that and that. No, that's the wrong approach. I think concentrate on the subject that you are able to photograph, and then maybe later you might get something if you want to expand your photography or something like that. I think checking out Josef Sudek's work and his philosophy is something that you might want to look into further. I will put a link into an article about him, that there's a lot more stories and some pictures, and you might want to read that too. And here is a video about another legend called Sebastian Salgado, who passed away last March. And what can we learn from him? Worth to watch. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.